Hi, Clay Daniel here with an LSAT explainer video around the concept of flaw questions. Very important and frequent category on LSAT logical reasoning. So we're going to take a look at flaw questions today by means of Test 73. Test 73 is available to you for free on your Law Hub account. So you can go there and pull up this question that I'm about to announce, and do sign up for a Law Hub account if you don't have one yet. But it's Test 73, Section 2, and number 13. Test 73, Section 2, number 13. You may want to pause the video and pull that up so you have it in front of you as I discuss it. Out of respect for LSAT's copyright, we're not going to read all the words in this question. I'm just going to talk about certain parts and use it as a way to help you think about flaw questions. Usually flaw questions are fairly straightforward to identify. This one actually says the word flaw, but the most common phrasing for flaw questions is the phrase vulnerable to criticism. So look for that phrase in identifying flaw questions. And then, just as with any other argument-based question, you want to go in the argument with a laser focus on finding that conclusion and then building your understanding of the premises around it. The way the last sentence begins here makes it clear that that's the conclusion and that the statistics in the first two sentences are supporting that conclusion. So we need to evaluate a claim, really a causal claim. Causation is all over LSAT arguments. And whenever you find it, you should be happy, because if you learn to recognize it, you can really decode it and understand what the flaw is in arguments. This is actually a negative causation argument, that putting more people in prison doesn't reduce crime. And you'll get used to the fact that when you see causation in the conclusion, there's often a correlation, some kind of association of factors in the evidence. And indeed, that's what we have here. In the past 20 years, no reduction in the crime rate, even though the percentage of the population in prison has increased substantially. Now, one thing we want to notice here is anytime you have percentages or fractions or things that sound statistical in nature, you want to watch out for a possible flaw with the statistics themselves. Notice that this says the crime rate. So that's a good thing for the argument, because it's not confusing some percent or rate with the number of crimes, let's say. Sometimes there's a confusion between the proportion of something, like 10%, and the actual number of things, which may not be the same thing because we don't know what the total is. 10% of the population of New York is not the same as 10% of the population of a small town, for example. That doesn't seem really to be the error here, though, because they're sticking with rate and percentage and basically saying, look, there's been no change in one and there's been no change in the other. So doing this, having this policy, seems to be having no effect. It sounds good as far as it goes, but we always want to be looking for what I would call a missing factor. Is there something else kind of lurking behind this situation that exposes a flaw in the reasoning? Is, in this case, there's a hypothetical. What would have happened in the absence of increasing the prison population? That's often the case, that the argument's talking about some event as if that's the only thing that could have ever happened. But we need to have kind of a fertile mind that allows us to ask these questions. Well, what else could have happened if a different policy had been put in place, or a different rate of imprisonment, let's say, of those accused or convicted of crime? What would have been the result? It's kind of like before and after pictures, that you might see in a magazine or a website. If we don't know the before, or if we don't know the hypothetical situation that would have happened in a different scenario, then we can't really evaluate and say this policy has had no effect. Most specifically, to get right down to it, what if the problem would have gotten way worse if more people hadn't been put in prison? That is a potential oversight to this argument. You can't simply say, well, nothing's changed since this policy's been put in place, so the policy's done nothing. That ignores the reality of what might have happened if you didn't have the policy. That might sound a little convoluted, but you'll get used to looking for those sorts of missing elements as you read LSAT arguments. By the way, in talking about this, I'm working backwards from the answers a little bit. You may or may not notice that hypothetical lurking behind this argument when you first read it. If you do, all the better. You can form an expectation of the answer, and you may be able to answer it very confidently and quickly. But another part of logical reasoning success is noticing a good and relevant answer, even if you haven't thought of it in advance. When we look at choice B, we see what we're looking for here. The what if that we could use to object to this argument is given in choice B. What if it could have been worse? What if this increase in the prison population has actually been keeping down crime? Even though crime hasn't changed, it would have been way worse had this policy not been in place. So that's what we're looking for. Notice that something like C may be very tempting and would be the answer if there were a problem with the statistics here. But we've already said, since they stay focused on the rate and not the absolute number, this argument is okay in that respect. None of the other choices quite hit on quite what we're looking for. D might be tempting if you're thinking about like an alternative to this approach, but it's not presuming a different, more effective alternative. It's not saying anything about a different alternative or what might have been better, but simply saying this approach, this reality is not working. It's not reducing crime. So B is the one we're looking for. Now there's all kinds of different flaws you can find in LSAT arguments. So it's important to practice enough to recognize them when they arise. But I'll just sum up by saying that we've talked about some of the most important ones today. We talked about correlation versus causation, which we see here. We've also talked about the idea of a missing factor, which we also see here. And although we don't see a statistics-based flaw here, we've addressed that as well, so that hopefully you can recognize it more readily when you do encounter it. I hope this video has been helpful to you. Please like and subscribe and enjoy the other LSAT videos on our channel. Let us know how we can help you as you seek to succeed and reach all of your target scores and goals on the LSAT and for law school.